Welcome to History Hack. If you didn't know by now, we are the revolution. That means we're sharp, witty, lots of fun, but it also means that we're essentially the peasants in Les Mis huddled round a table in the corner of the bar with no money. If you enjoy the show, please do support us. We have a Patreon account by which you can donate a small monthly sum in appreciation of what you're hearing. Alternatively, we have Ko-fi, in which you can just do a one-off donation as a thank you if you particularly enjoy a certain episode. Either way, we massively appreciate all of your support. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, you gorgeous lot. Welcome to a brand new mini-series from the lovely people at History Hack. I'm Charlotte White, but you can call me Charlie, and this is MsUnderstood. I'll be joined by a stellar lineup of guests who will each help me explore the lives of women who've been dealt an unfair hand by history. They may not all be great women who changed the world. They may not all be good women, but they will all be interesting. Some have been forgotten, some ignored, some misrepresented. They have all been misunderstood. Elizabeth Fremantle is the critically acclaimed author of 4 historical novels set in the Tudor court. Her debut, Queen's Gambit, has been adapted into a highly anticipated film. Firebrand, starring Alicia Vikander as Catherine Parr and Jude Law as King Henry VIII, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and early reviews have been wonderful. She's here today to discuss her latest historical novel, Disobedient, and the woman whose little-known life story inspired it. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you on today. This is exactly the kind of woman who MsUnderstood was made for. So Disobedient, it's set in early 17th century Rome and tells the story of Artemisia Gentileschi. You're going to have to call me up on my pronunciation if I get it wrong. Where do we find her at the beginning of her story?
Okay, so my novel just really covers a year in her life. She's aged 17, growing up in Rome in a kind of slightly impoverished artist's household. She's the only daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, who he's an artist, he's a jobbing artist. He's good. He's not one of the greats, but he's a very good, and he's been successful. And we can still see his paintings hanging on the walls of galleries now. And she has 3 brothers, and she's the oldest, the only girl. And she is obviously also a painter. And she's just reached this age where her father's kind of started to see the depth of her talent, and has also started to recognize that she's a better painter than he is. So there's some friction in the family as a result of that. He's kind of proud and excited about her talent, but he's horrified, one, that she's got all this talent and she's the girl, and her brothers don't have anything like so much promise. But also that she's a better painter than him. And it makes him, he's kind of jealous and proud at the same time, and it causes a lot of friction. He's a big drinker. He's, it's not a happy family household. So that's where we are at the beginning. Rome is it's a sort of new Renaissance city, really. It's obviously the site of the kind of center of the Catholic world, but also it's this place where people are amassing huge, wonderful art collections, as they had been in Florence maybe 50 years before. Rome has become this place. People are building incredible palazzos, and the whole city's being transformed over the last sort of decade. And it's really, this is still continuing to happen. So there are all these artists drawn to the city. So they're very much a part of that milieu. They're also on their uppers. So Orazio's not really getting any good commissions, and then he starts to pass off her work as his in order to get commission. Of course, increasing the friction in the family. Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful to think that there was sort of a Renaissance and then another Renaissance? It just kept going, just all this art being commissioned, all the building just flourishing over a really long period of time.
It was a very, very low. It was about 200 years, really. And I think, you know, that, yes, there were waves of it. And those waves hit different, because they were nation states. They weren't just all cities in Italy then. They, you know, Rome was a different nation state to Florence with different rulers, and as Venice was a different. So it's nothing like modern Italy. And so these waves of kind of new and exciting ideas would pass through these different places at different times. And of course, 10, 15 years before, Caravaggio had been the painter in Rome, who was really, he kind of changed the whole kind of painterly aesthetic. And so there are all these other painters who are, they're called Caravaggisti, who were painting, you know, they were his imitators, really, because everybody wanted work. Where so he, rather than making the biblical scenes all look like they sort of everything out of touch, it was they looked like real people on the real street, people they knew. And so it brought the art really into their world, and rather than being detached from them. And this is very much the manner that Artemisia takes up. You know, she is really a following in his footsteps.
It's not a spoiler to say that Caravaggio, he pops up at the very beginning of the book, and it's almost like he bequeaths to Artemisia this kind of Baroque, Gothic, very dark way of looking at the world.
Yeah, and there's always a lot said about his lighting, and how, you know, his paintings are very dark, and often there's a single light source, and it wasn't really, you know, he made that fashion. And you know, that's very much, you know, the lighting in her pictures, they're not essentially the same as his. It's got similarities, and it's definitely influenced by him. Yeah.
Gosh. And Artemisia's father, of course, he doesn't sort of look at this burgeoning talent as something useful, does he?
Well, he thinks, you know, in some ways it'll sort of up her, you know, he needs to get her married off, really, and hopefully to somebody with a bit of money, because his money problems are so terrible. He can't really put together a story for her. And, you know, it's all, he's kind of paying, you know, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. It's all, you know, his life's a constant series of tricky negotiations with money. And he doesn't know how he's going to carry on supporting his family. But he thinks with her that hopefully someone who's a great art lover will marry her because she can paint, and maybe she'll be able to paint lovely portraits of people's children and things. She doesn't want to paint those kind of things. She's much more ambitious. She is a really, truly, fully ambitious, burning with desire to be judged alongside her male peers. She doesn't, you know, she wants to be a great painter, not just a great female painter. She wants to be one of the greats, and she knows she's got the talent. She's convinced of her own talent. But this, of course, is not very feminine, and will make her, you know, kind of problematic as a sort of marriage proposal, because she's not really this little modest simpering thing who paints lovely portraits. She's a kind of, she says, she speaks her mind, and she's, you know, she kind of pushes against the patriarchy.
Oh, wonderful. A difficult woman. We love them. I'm guessing for her as well, you know, it's not like she could look to another female artist for any kind of inspiration. Of course, she'd want to be judged with the boys, because I'm guessing there wasn't someone for her to look up to and say, I could paint like her.
There were one or two. There was Sofinisba Anguissola, and there were a couple of very, very good painters who were successful working in the period a little bit before her, and not necessarily, I'm not sure if she was in Rome. I think there was one female painter in Rome, but they painted portraits. And Sofinisba was, you know, she was really highly thought of, and, you know, very, very gifted. But the subjects that Artemisia wanted to paint are what set her apart, really. And also the kind of sheer talent and the sheer kind of visceral brutality of her work. She picked very violent images often, and you see it's just completely different. from the other female painters that were working, the very few. I mean, there were, you know, two or at most three that were of any note to have been kind of, for their work to have been remembered now.
It's funny, I came across Sophie Nisba recently reading about Elizabeth de Valois. She ended up in the Spanish court painting for her and teaching her how to paint because she had ambitions to. It's a nice thing for a queen to do, keep her out of trouble. So Artemisia's father finds her a tutor, Tassi. Let's talk about him. He teaches her how to paint, but it's not his teachings that change her approach to the canvas, is it?
No, in a way, I mean, what Agostino Tassi was an incredibly brilliant painter of perspective and buildings. So he could do these extraordinary, I mean, it's almost like a kind of sleight of hand. He could turn, you know, those incredible Baroque kind of, I think of them as a great big wedding cake ceilings. You know, it's a flat, but it's painted into series of domes and turrets and then the sky beyond. And they are so realistic. He was really a master of that kind of painting and really, really brilliant at it. And if you see his work's absolutely meticulous if you see it. And I sort of think of him as a kind of visual magician. And yes, it's really not what he teaches her. You know, she's very keen to learn some of those tricks of perspective, but actually her work doesn't show any of that. You don't, you know, she doesn't really, she just seems to want to know how to do it, I think, because she's keen to learn as much as her father is keen for her to learn. Yeah, it's not what he teaches her that kind of changes her. It's what he does to her and how, you know, how their relationship pans out. I mean, I don't know how much I can say without giving spoilers, but
without giving it's tricky, isn't it? Because when you
know, you know, I think, you know, this story is a story about essentially about a rape, and you know, it could be that he didn't think he was raping her, he thought she was willing. Well, you know, that's not really how I've seen it, and so it's that event that really, it doesn't, I think it made, you know, the rage that that event generated was the thing that made her painting, it kind of took her painting to another level where, you know, the painting that she paints in response to that event is clearly something, I mean, it's a true masterpiece. And yeah, yes, so it wasn't his lessons that changed her as a painter.
So as a historical novelist, you know, when you're putting this together, you're creating a story around a person and events that actually happened. All of this is in legal records, isn't it? Because Artemisia refuses to accept the blame for her assault, and she refuses to take her father's elegant solution of just marrying the guy.
Normal. That was normal practice, and it still is in some cultures now. If you know, if a young girl is raped, a virgin is raped, then the rapist is they're required to marry to kind of set, you know, to kind of restore the honor of the family. And you know, it's really shocking to know that that still happens nowadays, but it does. And yes, so it's not really, in their world and in the world of the novel that I'm creating, it's not a shocking thing that she's expected to marry him.
No.
But she simply can't, because she has seen something in him that she's seen a malevolence in him that she knows she can't be married to him, no matter how much she feels it will restore her family's honor. And of course, that's really problematic. And it means that there's a court case in which he's refusing to admit any guilt, and she's labeled a whore, and she's really suffers the most unbelievable public humiliation. And she has to prove her testimony under torture. Not him, the one who's really lying about it, but her. And I think, you know, I just thought so much about these women who have not been believed when they report abuse and violence, and they're not believed, and you know that it's happened throughout history. It still happens, and I think it's a story that resonates with so many women now. Then, you know, it's so I feel like she kind of symbolizes something about male violence on women, and her work is still there as a kind of as a representing her in a way.
That's it. I mean, that's what, you know, when you read Artemisia's story, sure, you're reading something set in the 17th century, and it's in lovely Rome, where of course I'm not, unfortunately, sitting right now. So it's another world by all intents and purposes. But her story is so recognizable. Just open up any news site, any newspaper, and it feels very, very timely, and inspiring, that she wouldn't sit down and shut up.
No, she wouldn't. She refused to be silenced, and she refused to be a victim of her situation. She's very much, I feel like, you know, in some ways she feels quite modern in the fact that she's a survivor rather than a victim, and that's what I love about her. You know, she's extraordinary, and she's got this incredible resilience, and you know, that is her true story. And in fact, you know, we know quite a lot about her later life. I only cover this single year, in a young year in her life, when she's 17, turns 18. But she went on to become, she was the first woman to be accepted into the Accademia dell'Arte in Florence, which was, you know, really, I mean, it was unheard of. And she was commissioned to work for the Medici family, who were the rulers of Florence at the time. She really achieved what she set out to achieve, which is such a remarkable thing. And she kind of lived a slightly libertine lifestyle as well. She, for a long time, she married quite quickly after the court case, and moved to Florence with her husband. And then, not, you know, I think they had 2 or 3 children, and then not long after, she took a lover that her husband knew, and there are letters between them, quite friendly letters between her husband and the lover, that, you know, it seems as if it was completely an accepted thing, which I feel is, you know, really, she's got this kind of counterculture feel about her, that she doesn't want to conform to ideas about marriage, ideas about female painters, ideas about the legal system. She wants to do everything her own way, and she did. So that's another reason I admire her so much.
It is so wonderful. She does have almost cult status now, doesn't she, amongst people who are perhaps more of a casual art viewer like I am. I mean, I love anything Baroque, I'm there for it. And when I went to the exhibition of all Charles I's art collection a few years ago at the Royal Academy, they got so much of his collection back together. There was this little corner with a small painting of a woman painting herself, and it's the very famous self-portrait that she did. And she stuck out like a sore thumb, because it just felt like, in this entire building of amazing paintings, all painted by men, oh wow, a woman painted this, and it just felt so special that everyone just kind of loves her.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful piece, that yes, that's her self-portrait as the muse of painting, isn't it? And it's all a kind of slightly strange angle, and it feels very modern to me. That it feels really, you know, as if she's right here with us now. It's a beautiful piece. And so she came to England and painted for the English court, which is a kind of wonderful thought. So she got to travel Europe and paint. She traveled to Florence to Naples to England. And, you know, she was a great, great success.
Isn't that wonderful? Her work is obviously something that we still have of her that is tangible. Her paintings just, they leap off the page in the way that you described them. It's absolutely beautiful. It's almost painterly the way that you've written them. How much of her art informed your creation of her character?
But really my go-to thing for characterizing her. And, you know, obviously I read everything about her. I read her letters. So we do have her authentic voice, and we have her voice in the court transcripts, which fortunately I had in translation, not in Latin. I just struggled a bit with that. So we do have a sense of her from those documents, but for me the greatest sense of her comes from her painting. I mean, when you take, there's the Judith slaying Holofernes, which is a painting that's very, very prominent in the novel. The novel it kind of focuses on two paintings. One is a Susanna and the Elders, where this sort of naked woman's having her bath, and she's like, you know, she is being overlooked by these rather sleazy, nasty men who, you know, in the story, they tell her she's got to sleep with them. Oh, they'll tell everybody that she's a whore. Very nice, poor woman. Nice. So there's that, and then there's the Judith slaying Holofernes, and it's a biblical scene. She tends to paint these biblical scenes, but it's the ones she chooses that are really telling of her character. She chooses, in my mind, scenes that would now be regarded as feminist. You know, this is that she's painting these nasty men looking over this naked woman, and they, like, you know, it's as if they're kind of raping her with their eyes. It's really a comfortable picture. And, you know, you see a lot of these Susanna paintings where the Susanna is all sort of on display. Yeah. She's completely naked, desperately trying to cover herself with a substantially tiny little piece of cloth. And she's got her hands up between herself as if she's trying to push the men away. And she's afraid, and you really see it. And so it's a new way of regarding a female that creates a little discomfort in the view that in a lot of the men's paintings of that same subject, or the female nude in itself. During Holofernes, that is the painting that this when it was during a war in biblical period, and Judith was a Jewish woman who went into the camp of the enemy who had besieged their town, and they were all starving, and the water was running out, and she sneaks into the camp and beguiles the army chief, who is called Holofernes, and the head of the camp, and she then beheads him. She goes with her maid. So there's a picture of two women, one, you know, holding him down, while Judith is literally hacking off his head with a sword. Yeah. Now, the only person that I am aware of, the only previous artist who had done that painting at that moment of the head being beheaded was Caravaggio. So for her, a woman, to say, I'm going to paint this way, and there's blood spurting, violent, horrible, terrifying image. You know, that most painters will paint the two men scuffed in a basket, you know, that so it's a sort of after the act. But it's so uncompromising. And it made me think, firstly, what an uncompromising woman she had to have been to kind of, for her biography. And she saw, I'm kind of losing my thread here, but there's something about that painting to me that made me automatically look at her biography and the story of violent happened to her, and this as a response to that. And I know a lot of the art historians are loath to judge her work in terms of her biography and the events that the things that men have done that have created that work. But for me, she is, those things that happened to her are her. And her work, in my mind, as someone who also experienced something not dissimilar, her work can only be a response to that. That is a formative experience that can, why did she choose such violent topics? Like men being killed. There's another one where she's got Yale nailing a great temple. I think it's David. I'm not sure whose head it is, but it's right into the head. It's brutal stuff. And I think it, for me, it smacks of a kind of painted revenge.
So they're powerful women. She doesn't paint those women as little tiny things with a 16-inch waist and flowing hair trying to decapitate a man. These are properly built women. They've got big arms. They're showing it's the differential in size and strength that it takes two of these women to hold that big man down and get his head off. It's so powerful, that image.
Yes, it's incredibly physical. And yes, you mentioned that the women she paints, they're not these sort of simpering little, they're big and strong, and yeah, and that, yes, and actually she often used herself as a model, but we don't know which pictures were of her except for the ones that are called self-portraits. Yes, and that's something very appealing. She refuses to see women as incapable of bad acts, in a way, and in a sense that Judith, it's not really a bad act, it's a heroic act. So she's a female hero. Yeah, she's quite something.
You describe in your author's note that there is a balance that needs to be struck between removing the woman from her art so that it can be judged purely on merit against all of the other bits of art, and then that inescapable female experience that is in every single one of her brushstrokes. So I guess the question is not whether the art can be separated from the woman, but rather whether it should be. We need her story in there because it elevates her work.
I think so. I think that's what it does. I mean, I do understand that reticence of art historians. They don't want, they want her to be judged as an artist rather than a female artist. So I do kind of understand that. But I think it's been such a it's a that can we divorce the art from the artist? And you think of Ezra Pound's very beautiful poems, but he was a Nazi, so they are tainted by that. Roman Polanski, I find it very hard to appreciate his films, brilliant though they are. They're tainted with something, and that's personal. And I know a lot of people have very strong arguments for divorcing an artist from their work, and that if we look at the art of the past, we could find something terrible in every work of art. The galleries would have been emptied. But I think it has to be a personal thing, and my personal response to her work is that is the only response I can have. It spoke to such a personal part of me, and became a way for me to explore my own story, which I couldn't see it any other way.
I think that's fantastic, and maybe that is why Artemisia is such a cult figure amongst women. There's so many of us walking around with varying degrees of experience in sexual assault, in just day-to-day abuse, or right down to sort of the things that we think of as being quite petty, like being catcalled. The idea that there's this woman who's painting female heroes really, getting on top of the guys is quite an empowering thing.
I agree. Yes, and I think that's what I take from it is empowerment, and I think that does speak to modern women. I think modern women don't want to be victims. They want to be strong. They want to kind of inhabit the world and not kind of shrink into the background of the world, and inhabit the world in a way they want. And I think that's something, she becomes a kind of a blueprint for that.
I think it's both her art and her story as well. I was talking to a friend who is a mental health advocate about the concept of shame, and she said that she was paraphrasing an American psychologist, but she was saying that the two things that are needed for shame to exist are silence and darkness. And if you speak, you take away the power of shame. And I was thinking about Artemisia in that.
That's a fantastic thing. I've not really heard that. And it's so much something that I think I have come to understand. It's really interesting. And I was very inspired by this. There's this myth of Philomel and Procne, okay. Which is, it's a story told in Ovid, and I think it's probably told in various other places, but I know it primarily from Ovid. And so Procne and Philomel are sisters, and they are the daughters of a king and another king. I can't remember. I wish I could remember his name. I've got a terrible memory. Comes and marries Procne and takes her back to his country. But Philomel's so sad to be apart from her sister, and she really wants to go and visit him. So the husband comes back and takes her to her sister. But on the way, they stop off in this place and he brutally rapes her. And she says, well, I'm going to tell everybody what you've done to me. And so he cuts out her tongue and then incarcerates her in the middle of a forest. And it's really, those stories are brutal, those ancient myths. Anyway, she will not be silenced. She must speak out about what happened to her. And so she embroiders her story. And then when her sister finally, they manage to find her and she's able to say what happened to her. And then, of course, the sister is so angry that she serves up her eldest son to her husband as dinner. That's the sort of thing in Greece, apparently. And then they're all turned into birds, and she becomes a nightingale. Philomel becomes a nightingale, and so hence I have that little nightingale scene at the beginning of the novel. Sort of there, she's there in the background of the book, but that was a story that was very much an inspiration for me. I remember when I first heard it, it's so horrifying. You can't really think that anyone would think something up like that. But these are women, they get their revenge in a particularly bloody way, but they do. And this idea of her embroidering her story, in some ways I saw Artemisia in that way, that the paintings she made were equivalent to that embroidery.
Gosh, wow, now we know where Shakespeare got Titus Andronicus from.
Yeah, there is that.
Gosh, wow. I mean, if talk about modern sort of video nasties, this is we've got it from way back when. Wow. I mean, I'm taken aback by that. It's fantastic. What a brilliant story. It feels almost disingenuous to describe Artemisia as being a forgotten artist when she seems to have been deliberately omitted from the record. How did this happen, and who made that decision?
Well, I think, I blame the Victorians. But I think really what happened, she was really in her lifetime. And then I think what happened is, that women, I think progress for women has not always been one constant forward push. It's gone back and forth, back and forth. And I think there was a time really that when sort of, I suppose, late 18th century, there'd been a kind of a level of freedom for women in general. I mean, I'm not an expert on that period at all, but I do think then things like sort of anxieties about religion, so perhaps that came with ideas coming from Darwin and, you know, and philosophers who were starting to question the, you know, the Enlightenment, I suppose, which was way prior to Darwin, but, you know, that sort of set the ball rolling, where philosophers were starting to, some were starting to kind of question the idea of a God, an all-seeing, all dancing, all, you know, that you know, that these things were being questioned. And of course, with that kind of progress that kind of begins to undermine everything everyone's known, people tend to batten down the hatches. And of course, what gets limited first when hatches are battened down? Women's lives. So they wanted to control things, and so by controlling women, you know, if women were out of control, it was sort of felt that the whole of society was going to fall apart. They wouldn't even know who was siring their children, you know, God forbid. So, and, you know, then that became very extreme in the Victorian period. In the Victorian period, they weren't interested in any kind of cultural production by women. There were women writing, and obviously there were women novelists in the Victorian period, but they tended to be novelists that did have a kind of strong moral message. But also, when you think of the Brontes, they had to publish under men's names, and George Eliot, you know, so it was a taboo. And, you know, we still had the female portrait painters, but women weren't tackling big subjects, and they weren't really credited for anything. You know, it was convenient to think of women as lesser than men, and that they didn't have equivalent talent, they didn't have equivalent intelligence, and of course they weren't properly educated either, which that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, so, and then, you know, I think even right through into the kind of mid-20th century, no one was interested in looking at women's art. And, you know, you only look, I don't know if you're aware of Katie Hessel's book, The Story of Art Without Men. Or no, it's, yes, The Story of Art. It's been a very, very successful book, which, you know, and her aim is to really look through history at women's art, and there's so much of it, but it's not in, you know, it's only now they're starting to, I think the Tate Britain have done a rehang of the gallery, and they've got a lot more women's art in there now. But I think it was something like, I think 1% of the art in the National Gallery is by women. Wow. And I do think they're doing things to redress that, but it's quite shocking. And that, anyway, I think she became aware of that statistic, and that was what spurred her to write her book, which has been a huge success. And I think it's just been launched in America and it's really, really taken off. So it's great. It's all good for women artists.
That's fantastic. Well, we recommend that to our listeners to go and find. So Artemisia has been overlooked, ignored, forgotten, misunderstood. If you had 30 seconds to reintroduce Artemisia to the world, what would you say?
Oh goodness, that's tricky, isn't it? I might be repeating myself, but I say, okay, take yourself back to Rome in 1611. It's, you know, you're back in the past. Women are in a position where their only option for their future, young women, is to marry and have children. That's what they're for, and to be decorative. And there's this young painter, she's female, she doesn't care about how she looks, she doesn't care about marriage, there's nothing that interests her accept her painting, and she knows how talented she is, but everything about her is taboo. And she creates the most bold and bloody and visceral painting. It's shocking, terrifying, a true masterpiece. You know, something only a subject only Caravaggio has depicted in paint. And it's really, really shocking that this work, this masterpiece, is by a woman. She's bold, she's uncompromising, but she's completely clear about her artistic ambitions. She wants to be, she refuses to be defined by her father or some future husband or her ability to produce children. No, she wants to be judged alongside her male peers as an equal. But to achieve this, she's got to face the most extraordinary hardship, enough to crush any ordinary person. And she uses it to inform her art, and she proves to us that she's no ordinary person. So yeah, she conquers conquers flowers.
That's fantastic, Elizabeth. I so love this woman, and I'm so glad that you brought her to life for us. But I can't let you go without asking about Firebrand. This must be an incredibly exciting moment for you. So Queen's Gambit is Jude Law. What's going on?
So Queen's Gambit is my first novel. That it was published 10 years ago this year, and it has just premiered as a feature film starring Alicia Vikander and Jude Law as Catherine Parr and Henry VIII. You cannot believe how terrifying Jude, he transforms into this real monster, and they are extraordinary. And it premiered in Cannes, and yes, you know, there's a big buzz about it. It's going to be released in the probably autumn, winter. We don't have an actual date yet, but it's, you know, it will be released internationally. It's sold in all the territories, and it's super exciting. It was an incredible, I went to Cannes for the premiere, which was just an amazing experience. I'm still on cloud nine, to be honest. I can't quite believe that it's happening. And there's a new edition of Queen's Gambit going to be published simultaneously to when the movie comes out here as Firebrand, and it's a new edit. I haven't changed it, but I've tidied it up. So I thought it wouldn't be the right thing to really change it, although, you know, I could have gone to town and completely rewritten it, but I think my editor might have actually murdered me. Really tidied it up, made it more fluent. You know, over 10 years, I've really developed as a writer. So I think, you know, I think it's a tidier and better book, but it's still the same book. And so that's really exciting. So all the things with Disobedient and that all coming at once, it is a really exciting moment for me.
That really is. I mean, what writer wouldn't, given the chance to look at a manuscript from 10 years ago, want to just little nip and tuck here and there?
Yeah, and something I was horrified by. Because is
it true that Jude Law had a very special perfume made for himself to wear when he was dressed as Henry VIII?
100% true. Yes, no. I smelt it. Yeah, he did, and he's very much, you know, the kind of actor that really kind of gets down and dirty with the role, and he, you know, he learned to play the various musical instruments, and there's lots of music in it, and he had this awful stinking scent concocted because he wanted to kind of sort of, apparently Henry VIII, you could smell him 3 rooms away in his later life, because he had this suppurating ulcer that wouldn't heal, and so, you know, he smelled of rotting flesh basically. And and so Jude wanted to kind of recreate that atmosphere. And I think well, what he says is that he was using it just a tiny little dab to kind of get himself into the role. But that Kareem, who is the director, when he learned of it, he was spraying it all around the
Oh my
You can
goodness.
see them in the film, you can see them all going, oh, their mouths and noses. And you know that it would have really stunk. So it kind of created a certain authenticity. I don't know what all the camera crew felt about it. I think they were wearing their COVID masks quite tightly.
I bet they were glad for them. Well, we look forward to the movie tie-in Scented Candles. And
Scratch and sniff program.
oh my goodness, it sounds absolutely horrific. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. Disobedient is going to be published on the 27th of July, so make sure you pick up a copy, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thank you so much. We've had such a great chat. You've asked me such great questions, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.